Now on Wish TV, taking back the streets of Indianapolis.
And I knew that he had been shot, but I could see him moving his body on the ground, and I started praying, God, please don't let him die. Help him.
Another year of tragedy, heartache, and anger. So far in 2021 in Indianapolis, at least 877 people have been shot and at least 165 people murdered. And the city is on pace to shatter the record number of homicides for a year.
We are undergoing a profound epidemic of gun-related violence.
The mayor says he has a new 3-year plan to help fight violent crime as a community demands action, accountability, and change.
But I am disgusted and I'm sick in my heart when I see all this gunplay and these babies that their lives are being snatched prematurely. I am tired, and I'm sick and tired of being tired.
Tonight, we bring city officials and community leaders together on one stage with one goal: finding ways to stop the violence.
From Wish TV, this is a Crime Watch 8 special, City in Crisis.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Sanchez alongside Alexis Rogers. Thank you for joining us for a very special edition of Wish TV here on a very special night, live from Madam Walker Theater in downtown Indianapolis, where we brought together city leaders from across central Indiana to talk about the surge in violent crime across our area.
And our hope tonight is to have a very honest conversation about what's happening in our city, what needs to be done about it, and where we all can have a part in that.
That's right. And we want to talk about what happened last night. There was a shooting on the northeast side of Indianapolis where an officer was shot, as well as 2 other people. It's something that we've been following since last night. News 8's David Williams has much more.
This is where that shooting happened, at the Bayview Club Apartments just off Shadeland Avenue. Just before 9 Wednesday night, police got a domestic disturbance call from someone inside an apartment. An officer checked the outside of the apartment. At the same time, children climbed out a window and shots were fired from inside the apartment. The officer checking the perimeter got shot in the leg. That's when a SWAT team was called. SWAT officers rushed into the apartment and found 3 people shot. The suspect, 32-year-old Donald Williams, plus a 41-year-old woman and an 11-year-old girl. Police say Williams died at the hospital. They say he shot himself. The officer, woman, and child who were shot were also taken to hospitals. Reporting on Indy's North Side, I'm David Williams. Wish TV, wishtv.com, and follow us on Facebook.
And it's very important for us to have the most updated information, especially with that incident.
So that being said, before we get to our panel, we want to bring in Chief Randall Taylor to talk about the incident from last night. Chief, number one, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. An update on your officer and the latest on the investigation, if you can, for us this evening.
So the investigation is still ongoing. Fortunately, our officer has been released from the hospital. I believe he'll have full recovery.
Do we know anything about the circumstances as far as the investigation goes?
Well, we're still putting those things together. We will put out some more information as we get it, but what your reporter said was pretty much the latest. We have 2 still in the hospital, critical condition.
Okay. That being said, we want to introduce our panel now to talk about other situations that are happening across Indianapolis. We'll start here on the left side of your screen here. This is Judith Thomas. She's the Deputy Mayor of Neighborhood Engagement. Judith, thank you for being here, of course. As we just mentioned, Chief Randall Taylor to the left side of her. And then there's Pastor Juan Lopez. He's the executive pastor at Calvary Tabernacle Church here in Indianapolis. Maggie Lewis, who we know very well, she's the CEO and Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Indianapolis. She's also the majority leader on the City County Council. And our good friend Tony Mason, he's the President and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League.
And on our second row, we have Reverend Charles Harrison, well-known leader of the 10-Point Coalition. We also have Deandra Dykes, the founder and Executive Director of Purpose for My Pain, an organization that actually provides mentorship and victim advocacy. We also have have James Wilson, CEO of Circle Up Indy, a business and community organization that focuses on youth and families. And last but definitely not least, we have Abdul Hakim Shabazz from IndyPolitics.org. To all of you, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I think it would be really good for us to just get a gauge of everyone. So if I can have by a show of hands, if you believe that the violence in Indianapolis has reached a crisis level, please put your hand up.
Everyone. All right. Well, that being said, Pastor, we'll start with you. Why do you think that we've hit this crisis?
There's a lot of different reasons probably to consider. I think one challenge we've faced for a long time, I don't believe it's new, but I believe it's just grown to the point of where we're at, and that is people are a product of our environments. Speaking from the folks that I would mentor or counsel on a regular basis, or pulling from my own past, being someone that grew up on the east side in the broken home with the gangs, the violence myself, I realized that when we're raised in an area or in a family that has a negative connotation towards authority, not just police, but parents, teachers, all sorts of different forms of authority, and we start to lean on the side where, well, it's all about me, then that's going to lash out without any concern for anyone else.
I mean, that's a big point, because what you're talking about is environment, and you're talking about the things that many of us have no choice of when we come into this world. You know, let's continue that conversation. What else do we think is adding to this? I'll go here to you, Judith Thomas.
I would say the availability of guns, easily accessible. People are working through their conversations and their conflicts with gun violence. And with the escalated situation with racial unrest recently, with COVID-19, and honestly, really the country coming to a realization that it isn't an equal place to be in our country right now, and that there's some inequities that we're seeing, and people are frustrated. And really what we need to do is come together as a people, as a community, and work through these. Look at the resources that we have through the city, as well as organizations that have been here for years, grassroots organizations, church organizations that have been working with youth, and recruit these young people, pull them together and tell them they are worthy. They are part of the city, they are the future of this city, and we've got to be able to empower them and let them know that they are just as much of a resident in the city as anyone else, and how we can really provide those jobs and opportunities for them once they get into a little bit of trouble or challenges, but to be able to really give them something more than what they have, and that's opportunity, and that's what we need to focus on.
Chief Taylor, I'm going to lean heavily on you here, because this is a topic that we're going to keep coming back to. Obviously, that's the focus of this discussion this evening. So your thoughts on why we've hit this point?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said here. Environment, opportunities or lack thereof, availability of weapons are all things that we deal with on a regular basis, myself and the great officers that are working for the IMPD. But I often wonder, you know, I hear we talk about COVID, that's a part of it, and the systemic issues that have existed for decades, but I think also somewhere we have lost our way from the standpoint of just good character. We've all grown up with people who haven't had the advantages that we would hope they would have in life, but it doesn't mean they go around pulling a trigger and shooting people. So I think there's a number of variables there. I think we have to, as a community, we have to look at all those things and come together and strive for these changes that need to happen.
All of these dynamics are all true, each and every one of them, and we wanted to see what's being done about it. So I had a chance to sit down with Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett, and we talked about his new 3-year plan. I asked him a lot of questions about how all the things that you all are talking about goes into that. And we've seen the number of homicides per year jump up from 155 in 2017 to 215 last year. That's a lot of people not coming home. And so even so, he says that he's pretty confident that his $150 million plan will be able to commit to bringing those numbers down. Let's take a listen.
I am confident we'll reverse those numbers. And the reason I have confidence, and the reason why I want your viewers to have confidence, is the numbers that you just identified, which were accurate, which showed a decidedly lower number of gun violence or of homicides in those years, 2016 to 2019, we were implementing programming to try to keep those numbers down or as low as we could. As you just identified, 2019, the numbers actually did go down. And so what that tells me that what we were doing over the course of those 4 years was having an appreciable effect on at least keeping the numbers at a reasonably steady level, with the hope being, and 2019 was a harbinger of maybe good days to come, of those numbers going down. The truth is that with the oncoming of the pandemic, a lot of our progress that involved hands-on, one-on-one involvement out in the neighborhoods to try to identify and prevent, whenever possible, criminal activity or gun violence. All of those programs went to the wayside because everybody was shuttered at home and trying to take care of our public health and our public safety from a COVID-19 related perspective.
That was Mayor Joe Hogsett that you just heard from there. I would like to direct a question to Deandra. You know, it's something, we talk about these numbers and we talk about plans, but the numbers that we're talking about are people, and all of those people have mothers. And I know that you are an awesome mother that has talked to other mothers. So tell me, do you think that this plan will help? What's your perspective on this?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I want to say we have to make sure that we know that we need money, but we can't keep throwing money at things and not putting our heart into it. And I was sharing with someone before we came up here, we have to make sure that we are walking the walk, and we're not just talking the talk, but we're actually walking this thing out, which is something I've done every day on a personal level with my own child, as well as reaching out to many other mothers in the community who have been impacted by gun violence. And so as leaders, elected officials, and our police department, we want to make sure that we are really putting our heart into this thing, because we have a heart issue. We have an issue of lack of hope in our community, and with us being on the front lines and being in contact with these families, we are one of the first people that they look to show love and compassion in this space. So we want to make sure that as we get into programming and things of that nature, that we are really doing this thing with a heart. And when we show our heart and when we mentor in that space, we are touching lives. And me and James was just saying, if we save one person, that means the world to so many. One person could be a game changer, a world changer. And so I think programming is awesome. We need it. Funding, we definitely need it to do the work in this space, but we want to make sure that we're leading with our heart.
Heart issue, that's strong.
It certainly is. Reverend Harrison, we want to get your take on this as well. I saw you shaking your head over there.
Well, I'm in agreement with what she was saying, but I think, if we're really gonna reduce the level of violence, I think this city has in the past has done a good job when we have had more of a bottom-up approach to addressing the violence, where it was really community-driven, where you are galvanizing the community, whether it be the churches or grassroots organizations, the business community, neighborhood associations, community centers, when we're all working on that issue together, because the problem is multi-layered, it's complex. There is no one silver bullet to it, so it's going to take the village working together, and when we have done that in the past, we have seen much more success, and I'm hoping that we go back to a more of a bottom-up approach, neighborhood by neighborhood, working in partnership with law enforcement and community. And I think if we do that, I think we can begin to turn these numbers around.
What I hear is teamwork, and I also hear responsibility, and we're going to get into that very soon.
But first, it's a legacy to a social activist. The historic Madam Walker Theater, the reason why it was built and why it still stands. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
You're watching Wish TV, locally owned and locally operated. Indiana's only statewide TV news network.
We're live tonight at the Madam Walker Theater. Such a fitting destination and place for the conversation we're having today, as it's named after the Madam C.J. Walker.
It's a beautiful theater here in downtown Indianapolis. Her passion for social justice ran just as deep as her work as a business mogul. Katira Winfrey has much more on her life and her legacy here in Indianapolis.
Social justice birthed the idea for the Madam Walker Theater.
She went to a theater. They tried to do a black tax against her, and she refused to pay it. And so she was like, I can make my own theater.
It opened in 1927, 8 years after she died. Although she wouldn't live to see it, generations of others have. It's become a place of culture with social justice at its foundation.
She also was a philanthropist. And she was about the community. She was always on the front lines and making sure, that Black people had equality.
Christian Strickland is the Madam Walker Legacy Center president, and it's building on her work. Although impacted by the pandemic, the theater continues its Summer Institute programs for the youth and is working on other programs for the winter.
We're here to continue to uplift her legacy. We are an organization for the community, and so it's our responsibility, to be there and be a part, however, we can.
As the Madam Walker Theater sits along the Indianapolis skyline, crime and violence below can't be ignored. But Strickland says together we can change that.
This is not okay, as I said before, so we got to do what we need to do. To save our children.
Reporting in Indianapolis, Katira Winfrey, Wish TV, wishtv.com, and follow us on Facebook.
Katira, thank you very much. And I also, again, spent some time with Mayor Hogsett this week, and I asked him who he believes and what he believes is his responsibility in the rise in the violent crime in our city. This is what he had to say.
As mayor and as the leader of our city, it is profoundly and deeply saddening to me whenever there's loss of life, at frankly whatever age, particularly young life, when really they had a situation of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That seems to me profoundly morally unjust. But any loss of life is unacceptable, and we've been seeing too much of it. We all have a role to play in helping make our community safer. Ultimately, a lot of that leadership falls on me as the elected mayor. A lot of it, people in our community look to Chief Randall Taylor and the brave 1,670 sworn police officers of IMPD. But the truth is also, it can't be just us alone who reverses this trend. We need people in our community to do as you reported, and that is not focus so much on vengeance, but focus on justice. Well, what does that mean? That means people willing to stand up in our community and tell us what they know, tell us what they've seen, tell us what they've heard.
And that was Mayor Joe Hogsett. So I think this is a good time to bring James Wilson into the conversation. James, you heard what the mayor had to say. Specifically, he was talking about when Antonio Patton was talking very impassioned about a little boy being shot in his grandmother's home. Where do you stand with all of this and when it comes to responsibility?
I understand the level of responsibility has to take effect directly in our community, but we need to go a little bit deeper. When we're looking at why violence exists, right, we're looking at the root cause, the origin. When we look at the root cause and we look at the origin, we look at our environment, right, and what our environment is always dealing with on a daily basis. Socioeconomic trauma, you guys hear me preach about it a lot in media, on TV, and on our podcast. It's really understanding what socioeconomic trauma is. It's the multi-layer of everything that exists that Blacks and Latinos or those in poverty-stricken areas deal with. It's waking up in the morning, trying to figure out how to pay your bill. Your mind's racing a million and one ways. Waking up in the morning, trying to figure out what you're going to put on your kids. Your kids may not have clothes. Waking up in the morning and trying to figure out where you're going to get a job at because you may not have the education to really get ahead. When you look at those root causes and understand those root causes, think about the anger and frustration that soon to follow. People are going to go through things. If I took away everything from everybody on the stage and they had nothing, survival mode kicks in. When survival mode kicks in, the rationality of life, I hear a lot of people up here talking a lot of great things, but the rationality of life goes out the window. They're trying to get ahead.
That's a good point.
Absolutely. So that brings the conversation to Maggie Lewis. Maggie, good to see you again. Thank you for being here as always. We know you as the CEO and Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club. You're also in charge of the City County Council here. Your thoughts on what James had to say? It's something that we talk about quite often. It's systemic.
Yeah, I agree with everything that James said, but I do want to say that, I'm not interested in pointing fingers, but I think all of us have a role to play in addressing crime and the things that happen in our community. It's not just, there's not just one answer, because if there was one answer, I think we would all be excited and get on board and do that. So again, there's a lot of issues that everyone in our community is dealing with, the lack of hope, the lack of opportunity, but at the end of the day, I really do believe that it's important that all of us come together collectively and do our part. There's a part for each and every one of us to play in this.
So how do we change it?
Yeah. Like this, have the conversation, invite everyone to the table, make sure law enforcement's at the table, our pastors are at the table, community organizations like the Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis are at the table talking about how do we collectively get our community back.
When we go to neighborhood conversations, we spend a lot of times in different neighborhoods, just like a lot of you do. Responsibility always comes up. Everyone has a different idea of whose responsibility is it. Tony, we'll go to you and then we'll get to you. Everybody's having a lot of conversations at the Urban League. That's literally the epicenter where a lot of these things are happening. So how is responsibility being talked about? Is there a way for us to all get on the same page?
Well, absolutely. First and foremost, it's being discussed with respect to the collective responsibility that we all have to be our brothers and sisters keepers. We're living in a city where 28% of all African Americans, 28% out of 250,000 are poor. And so when James talks about the poverty, the desperation, when you hear everyone talk about the sense of hopelessness, that is real. So we have a collective responsibility to create opportunities, but we also talk about responsibility through the lens of what we need to do for each other, how we treat each other, how we come together as the village to support each other, to support our children. We have to get back to that concept of caring for, supporting, and loving each other, and being responsible for every young person or old person that we come into contact with.
Abdul, what about you when it comes to the root of responsibility? What's your take on this?
I'm going to be the bad guy here, because while fundamentally I do agree with what everyone has said here, we have to understand at the end of the day, bad people exist in this world, and bad people need to be put away and behind bars. If you look at our murder rate for the past 10, 12 years right now, 70% of the victims, 80% of the suspects all have prior adult felonies, as either crime with a gun, crime with drugs, or crime against another person. We just reformed our bail system, so now people who are dangerous and should be behind bars are getting out and walking back out on the streets again. Heck, even one of the mayor's own peacekeepers got in trouble for making for viable threats. So we have to put the bad guys behind bars. I'm a big believer in weed and seed. Before we can do all the conversations and get everybody together and hug and sing kumbaya, we've got to put the bad guys behind bars where they belong. It's just that simple.
So that being said, and I want to open up to everyone, is Marion County's judicial system working effectively? Reverend Harrison, we'll go to you first on this.
Well, certainly there are some concerns about whether or not it's working effectively and whether it's broken or not. It's funny you say that. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at 29th and MLK, and a guy had just been arrested and was released within 72 hours. He was involved in some crimes against some individuals in the neighborhood. And when the system doesn't work properly, what happens is street justice kicks in. And street justice means that the people on the street are going to do justice when the justice system does not work. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. There's a lot of retaliations that we're seeing happen in the community, or when someone is not punished the way the streets feel like they should, then we see a lot of those kind of killings and shootings in our community. So we cannot just arrest repeated offenders over and over again and keep putting them back on the street is going to lead to more violence.
That's a reality that is so not a 9-to-5 problem. Right. Like the things that we're talking about are not happening 9 to 5. So Chief Taylor, do we have a lot of street justice issues? Is that what we're seeing? Is that why we're seeing especially an uptick in violence involving kids?
Yeah, well, I think as you look at the numbers, we have to factor in that a lot of that is retaliatory. I agree with the Reverend. Sometimes when people aren't held accountable, the street takes care of it. Obviously, we don't condone that, but I understand that. I think our issue more is we have people that have committed violent crimes that have, at least initially, have what would be considered probably a rational bond account, but then those get reduced, and next thing you know, they're back out. I mean, we all know about the case with the man who stabbed somebody and he's in, and then the bond gets reduced and he ends up killing his girlfriend. That's where our concern comes in. That's where my officers' concerns come in. We arrest them, and then they're out very quickly. And I understand the reason for some of the change in that. Obviously, when we have low-level drug offenses or obviously traffic offenses or things that are not violent, maybe those folks are not the ones that need to be incarcerated all the way up to the time of trial. But I believe when you've got a violent crime that you've been arrested for, I think you got to take a long look at really whether or not that person should be out, possibly, having another victim.
James, how do we solve that? Not easy.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking and I'm listening and I'm thinking and I'm listening and I'm processing. So this is what I'm going to say, because you know me, Phil. I'm going to keep it 100. Yeah. So with that being said, it ain't about always locking everybody up. I'm a cat with a criminal history. I've been one of the guns that IMPD had to come arrest. You keep locking us up, we go learn. That's what we go do. We go to jail, we come out, we get smarter, and figure out how we're gonna rob a brother over here. You know what I'm saying? It's more to it than just that. It's really going back to, once again, the socioeconomic component. Understanding that individual to the finite, and a lot of people are not doing that. What it is let me lock them up in the justice system. Got them. Our justice system here is trash. I'm just gonna be honest with you. It has been for a long time. There's a lot of people that's incarcerated for things they didn't do across the country, not just in Indiana. So if we're looking at just simply leaning on the justice system, looking at a reform there, that's a whole nother component. We need to be looking at the state house down there. Whole different ball game. Now, if we're coming back to the basis of the people, I'm not gonna sit here and say lock everybody up. It's understanding that there's people that shoot other people that don't have violent crimes. Everything's not always violent crime. Chief can contest to that. You may have somebody just one day to just prank out and has been through some stuff, right? Things happen of that nature. And so we can't always look at it and say, lock everybody up with a violent crime. Everybody doesn't always have them to commit murder.
Yeah. Judith, I want to bring you into this, and Deandra, I want to bring you into this as well, because this is something that impacts so many families that have been on both sides of this thing, of having a loved one that's been locked up and also having someone who has been hurt in their life. How do we get to the point where we can address that without locking people up, to James' point?
It comes to the resources and what we were talking about, and really looking at policing in a different way. We have MCAT teams that are out on the streets that are going to runs that are not violent runs where people are having mental or behavioral issues. And when those teams get there, they discuss, they're trained in a different way. They're looking at the challenge and sending people to the resources they need. We have the AIC, the Assessment Intervention Center, that is now at the new Community Justice Center, where anyone can go. And we need to really talk about this. People that are having challenges, breakdowns, drug challenges, drug problems, can go there and get assessed, can stay overnight, multiple days, until they are connected to the services that they need. When people are in prison, to analyze that, not to, when they're ready to get out, not to all of a sudden not have any type of resources whatsoever as far as re-entry and job opportunities. What programs do we have now that we could connect people that are incarcerated to help them with a better life, with better choices, with better opportunities? And with the new Community Justice Center, this is where we will have these wraparound services where we're not dealing with it the day they're about to get out, but we're dealing with what their needs are while they're in there. What kind of counseling? We've got a lot of mental challenges and trauma that people are dealing with that we have not addressed in the African American community, in the Latino community, just in America, period. And how we really need to look at this and take time and give people the help that they need. And that's where we will make a change.
I'm hearing you say get ahead of this, Deandra. Is that kind of how you're viewing things, the ways that this can be approached?
Actually not. I kind of feel like I'm about to be the bad guy, because when I sit here and listen to this, and I'm definitely in support of resources, rehabilitation, but when your heart has been snatched out of you by way of your child, so I hear Ms. Thomas, but my son will never walk again. He will never talk again. And mothers like me have to fight for resources. We have to get on the battlefield. We're ridiculed by Medicaid and other services because what someone else did to our children. So when you say these things about rehabilitating those that are actually committing the crimes, and I mean those that are committing the crimes, not those that are being put behind bars for things they did not do. Right. But I'm talking about the known triggermen in our city who get away with doing this to our children. I am not in support of rehabbing anything that they do, because my son will never say mama again. I visit his bedside. I got told today that I could not visit my son because it was too hot outside and I can't come into his building. There are mothers in my support group who are calling me crying. There's 3 of them right now. 3 of them right now who the trial date keeps getting turned around because of COVID. The victim, the perpetrator's family was notified, but the mothers that I support go down to the courthouse and are told, sorry, no trial today. So the perpetrator's family got notified, but they didn't, and then they're getting released on ankle bands. No, thank you. But these mothers are visiting gravesides, so yes, we may need to rehab those who, before they get to the point of committing violent crimes. But when you take a life and you have pulled my heart out and I can't hear my mother say mama again, there's no rehabbing that, because my son, they told me he's irrehabable.
Abdul, I think it goes to what you were saying at the top here, right?
Yes, it is. It is a matter of, and we're not talking about somebody who's caught with a splendid packet full of marijuana. We're not talking about that. That is a nonviolent offender. I'm not talking about possession. I'm talking about hardcore criminals who shoot, who rob, who steal. And by the way, African Americans are the biggest victims of violent crime by other African Americans, because that's a conversation nobody wants to have on black related crime. But at the end of the day, if we don't put the bad guys behind bars, none of this matters, because once again, when I have a patient who's bleeding, I have to stop the bleeding first, and then I can take care of the patient. If the patient's having a heart attack, I can't say, well, so what did you have for dinner last night? Oh, you had a steak. Well, that's why you had a heart attack. Well, no, we got to save him first and then go from there. So my thing is, once again, is you got to put the bad guys behind bars, give the police and law enforcement, give everybody the resources that they need, that's fine, but you got to put the bad guys behind bars first. It's just that simple.
And just like how we've been seeing everyone having different perspectives of this, that's why it's so important to have conversations like this. So hold on, we'll continue to have these conversations, but coming up on our City in Crisis Town Hall special, treating violent crimes as a public health crisis. We go one-on-one with Wish TV medical expert and former Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, about that and about the role of mental health treatment when we return.
You're watching Wish TV. Watch on demand, online, and on the go. Indiana's only statewide TV news network.
Hi there, and welcome back to the Walker Theater, where we're having a really good conversation. One of the calls that we keep on hearing about here in Indiana, and honestly around the country, is to label violent crime as a public health crisis.
So what does that mean, right? It's a question that we constantly ask ourselves. Wish TV medical expert Dr. Jerome Adams, he's a former Surgeon General. We put that question to him. Look.
I think something that we talked about a little bit earlier that's top of mind for me when I think of crime, it automatically goes to the 4-year-old girl who was shot last week. Yes. She was critically injured. And I think to myself, what is it like for a child to not only see the gun violence in their communities, but also experience it that for themselves and then grow up with that, how that affects you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, on every single level going into adulthood.
Well, when I heard that story, where my mind first went was back to my anesthesia roots. And I'm an anesthesiologist, worked at Eskenazi, which is the local level 1 trauma center. And I can't tell you how many times we've had young people, far too young people, come in with multiple gunshot wounds, sometimes coming in over and over and over again. And that is tragic in and of itself. But to your point, one of the tragedies that goes far beyond that hospital visit is the mental health impacts of this occurring to that individual, to their family, to the entire community who is now traumatized by what's happened around them. And it's what we term adverse childhood experiences, but again, so many far-reaching impacts of that event.
You know, it's funny, I've covered in my career so many different shootings. Too many. And every single time I'm on a crime scene, you know, you have the crime scene tape up, the police are there. Sometimes the victim is still there on the scene. And I'll look to my left or my right, and I'll be in a place very similar to this, in a park, and I'll see kids riding their bike, playing on the swings, as if it's normal. It's a normal day. Is there concern that we have kids who are growing up in our communities who are becoming normalized to this crime, to this violence that we're seeing?
Well, in some ways, they are becoming normalized, and that is unfortunate because they're being desensitized to the violence all around them, and they're less likely to speak out against it or to feel that it is outside of the norm. In other ways, it's important for us to recognize that this creates what we call toxic stress, and we internalize it. We think we're going about our day just fine, but really it's causing chemicals in our body that shouldn't be there to be at higher levels. And studies show that can lead to high blood pressure, that can lead to heart attacks, that can lead to diabetes. It's even been linked to cancer. So being in an environment like that, it really is why we call this a public health crisis, because there's the acute event, and then there are long-term chronic consequences, not to the individual alone, but to the entire community that impact their health.
So Dr. Adams, what do we do? What do we do about this public health crisis?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is name it. We have to call it a public health crisis so that it gets the attention that it deserves. The second thing we have to do is to collect data. And we still have very poor data collection. You all do a good job in the media of highlighting individual events, but we don't have good data on a local and on a state level about what's happening, where it's happening, why it's happening, who it's happening to specifically. So we need to collect that data. And then we need to do research on ways to turn things around. And the good news, and there is good news, I was on the south side of Chicago visiting schools there. There are great programs around the country where they've screened people for adverse childhood experiences at a young age. And they found that people who have high ACE scores, when you put them into programs and pair them with mentors, help them understand that there is a way out of the cycle that they sometimes find themselves trapped in because their mother isn't around because she's misusing substances or their father's in jail. There are ways we can pair them up with other individuals, and the evidence shows you can, through positive adult supports, help them overcome these challenges and actually get to a place where their new normal is something that we would consider normal and not something that includes violence all around you.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the hope, right? We want our communities to be safe, and I appreciate your time and your expertise, Dr. Adams. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Jasmine, Dr. Adams, thank you very much. A lot was said there, Alexis. One key part that I really want to focus on is toxic stress, is something that he talked about. James Wilson, I want to bring you in once again because that's something that you and I have had a number of conversations about over the years, and you've addressed here just at the top of the show as well. Your thoughts on what the doctor had to say?
It goes back to, again, what the doctor just outlined with socioeconomic trauma. When you're looking at that, it looks at, again, the root cause for mental health, right? When you're dealing with things, can't get ahead, you're struggling. It sends out the different toxins throughout your body, anger, frustration, emotions, rapid forms of emotions when you're constantly trying to fight. When you're looking at socioeconomic trauma for a full component, it is a health factor. It looks at the drug addiction, the violent behaviors. It looks at many different things that do correlate and connect to what we're talking about and dealing with now. The problem being is that this information has been out for some time. We released this information last year to a lot of our people that are in office. What's been done about it? We're still sitting up here having panel discussions and whatnot, and people out there are literally going through things physically and mentally right now. We keep talking about there's resources. Tell me specifically, what are the mental health resources? I need more detail, because my little brother just went through it. I just buried him a few weeks ago. I need to know, because the work that I do, I'm connected to a lot of these resources that's out here, and I hear a lot coming from the mayor's office, but I need to see more. I need to see a strong roadmap. Everything is generalized right now, right? I need to see a direct roadmap of what are the direct resources. Are we working directly with the grassroots to help support some of these families that may be going through strong mental health issues? And that mental health issue is not just simply, I woke up hereditarily going through things. If I can't pay my bills again, if I'm going through things again, it causes a lot of stress psychologically. So what are we doing to get ahead? Not through conversations, but through actions.
Let's talk about some of those resources. Deputy Mayor, what are some of those resources that could help in situations like this?
Well, with the American Relief Plan that has just come out and that we're working on right now, we're looking at allocating $30 million to mental health, to looking at even finding clinicians that look like the population, that can help the population and understand what a lot of our community members are going through. So we're working through that right now. As I mentioned, we have the AIC, the assessment center, that can help people find those resources. They can walk in there for free, no insurance, they don't have to pay. People will sit down with them, find out what their challenges are, and get them to where they need to be. They are there, we are here, we are developing more programs. We are going to have $45 million in grants to community organizations over the next 3 years, where we can be able to give those organizations that have been working for years, some organizations that have never received funding from some of our local funders, and give them the resources to be able to get more funding to build their programs even more. I have met so many organizations since I've been in my job since January, and grassroots organizations I'd never heard of that haven't been connected to a lot of funders. How do we get them what they need so they can help these citizens that need the support from a mental standpoint, from programming? But again, we are looking at partnerships and collaboration so that we can build a robust system that will help people. And I would be able to give him a list of 10 places to go for someone that needs help. And that's where we're going. And the Office of Public Health and Safety is very focused on that as well right now.
And you said something that was very interesting to me and important. You said trying to get resources in these communities with people who look like them.
Yes.
That's an important part to that, and I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more. But
yes.
I wanted to highlight that.
Funding built into the program to seek out those clinicians and help them with what they're trying to get done and connect to the people.
Yeah, as we mentioned, we're at Madam Walker Theater, where not only do we have a fantastic panel, we also have a live audience here as well. We have a question.
I think we're talking about policing, and I'm definitely for the police officer. I think they're doing an incredible job. But I'm thinking more about being proactive policing versus reactive policing. It seems like too often, as far as the public goes, we see the law enforcement officer going to the scene after it's already happened, after the perpetrator's already gone, and no witnesses and no idea who did this violent crime. While driving, I see a lot of police cars sitting in empty parking lots way in the back of the parking lot. I don't see police cars out in front of the Family Dollar in a high crime area, just sitting there doing the reports or whatever. But I see them way in the back of an empty, abandoned parking lot, where they're going to have to be reactive, but not proactive. Rolling up and down neighborhoods that there's a high crime rate, maybe even pairing up two officers together in certain areas so that both eyes can be on the neighborhood, protecting the neighborhood. An incident happened this past week. I've been walking the canal, and I've been kind of walking through downtown, just kind of exploring. And police are supposed to be patrolling the canal.
We get what you're getting at here, James, so we're running out of time. So,
sorry.
Chief Taylor, no, that's okay. Chief Taylor, we want to get your reaction to that question, because I think it's a pretty good one.
No, it is. Unfortunately, when you've seen officers in back of parking lots, the nasty part of policing is for every action they do, they probably have to write a report. and they get in those areas and they write their reports. So that's part of it. But we do have beat policing, which encourages our officers in their beats to get out of their car and meet with people. And I don't know that that's happening in your particular area, but that's the goal of it. But sometimes they are hopping from run to run, and they're not able to do that. With the increase in officers that we're hoping to get, the mayor is finding funding for 100 new officers. If we can meet that goal, that is going to put more officers in those areas and being able to get out of those vehicles and meet people and have those relationships and do that proactive type of stuff that you're calling for and that we're looking for as well.
I think we should open this up to our entire panel. The question is the right policing happening in these neighborhoods? I'll go to you, Reverend Harrison. Do you think that the right policing is happening in these neighborhoods?
In the sense, I do see police officers more busier now in the sense that when I'm out with 10 Point, the number of shots fired calls, the number of people that are being shot and stabbed now, it's overwhelming compared to what it used to be. I've been doing this for 23 years now, and the level and the volume of the violence that we're seeing now is so much more greater than what it was when I started 23 years ago, that we probably need a lot more police officers in a lot of these hotspot areas, because now it's not just in 6 locations that it used to be, where we used to be able to focus on 6 hotspot areas. It's now widespread all over Indianapolis, the north side, the south side, the east side, the west side, in areas that traditionally we have not had a lot of violence, but now we're seeing it.
Reverend, thank you so much. You know, we're going to continue this discussion right when we come back.
All right, welcome back on a very busy and special night here at Wish TV. We're live from the Madam Walker Theater in downtown Indianapolis. We want to continue the conversation we're having before we went to the break. Pastor Lopez, we'll turn the conversation over to you, sir. Your thoughts on what needs to be done and whether or not police are doing the right thing in communities across the area.
I believe that their intent is pure. They're doing their best they can with probably the resources they have. I would say that if we could see an increase in the number of police officers in areas that are challenged or that we're having repeat problems in, as well as building a strong rapport, placing police in the neighborhoods or in the parts of the cities, one part of it. But we got to have that strong rapport with the police and the community to where the community welcomes that and they're not against it.
You know, Maggie, let's go to you because you work with the youth all the time. I mean, you see exactly what they're seeing. What do you think about this approach?
So I think it's important that, and I know folks probably roll their eyes when you hear this, but our youth are truly our future. If we're talking about these investments, we need to invest in our kiddos right now. We need to support those youth servant agencies right now. At the Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis, we believe that every child deserves to live a life full of hope and opportunity, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that they grow up to be successful adults. And again, I'm going to say this, we need to start investing in our kiddos now.
Tony, I would assume that you agree.
Absolutely. In this moment in time, we have the opportunity to collectively invest. So we've heard the mayor talk about the dollars that will be invested through the American Rescue Act, but also what we see happening through the Business Equity for Indy initiative, where corporations are leaning in and are looking to make commitments to address racial equity in this community, and then things such as the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Plan that we are a part of, and the entire community has played a role in helping to inform. If we can work together, then we can address a number of these issues. We may not solve all of the problems, but things such as putting more officers of color out on the streets, addressing mental health issues and other disparities that we need to get after in this community. The moment's now, we can no longer afford to wait, because the numbers that we're seeing in terms of murders and violent crimes will only get worse if we don't address it now.
Interesting point that you're making. Deandra, what do you think about this? What's your response?
Let me get it in a few seconds here. Couple of things. I recently did quite a few ride-alongs as I was getting my training to be on the Use of Force Board. I will say that I was very surprised with the interaction with our community as well as our police officers. It was better than I thought, and so that was good and heartwarming to see. The one time that I got to ride with an officer of color, he was a black officer, I really had a one-on-one with him about being the face out in the community, going to the schools, walking the neighborhoods. In order to really, really bridge that gap, we need to see that activity from our officers as well as from our community, accepting our offers, playing that part in our community. So it's a two-way street. As we're talking about accountability, as the community, we have to take that accountability as well as our police department, getting in the streets, getting in the neighborhoods, playing basketball with the kids, stopping by a neighborhood barbecue. But we have to be open to having that. We need to see more officers of color leading that role as well. And again, it's just, for me, it's just going back to making sure that we are supporting families impacted by gun violence, okay? Yeah. We can do rehab and those things of that nature for the perpetrators, but again, it's nothing like having your heart tugged at and taken away. Literally, you lose a piece of your heart when you lose a child. My son may still be here, but he's not the same. I've completely lost who my son was, and I only got 13 years of what that looked like. And so we need more resources and support of supporting our families in the aftermath of gun violence.
We have 1 minute left. James, your take on all of this, if you can wrap it up quickly.
Madam, I'm going to shoot towards you a little bit, and I'm going to be real with you. I know you work for the mayor. I love it. Great job. But I want to make sure that the dollars, when I heard and you outline your resources, I need to hear detail of where this money is going. I'm a taxpayer, and I hear Maggie. I hear you loud and clear, but I need details. Been working with that man for a long time. We know all the systemic issues and all these things that exist. We know this. I'm tired of going to meetings 10 years later and we keep talking about the same data. I want to see where I wake up each morning and go work where my taxpayers' dollar going directly.
I'm with you on that. Let's sit down and talk.
Well, there you go.
He ain't gonna talk to me.
No, you and I can talk.
I think this is where it begins.
Yeah.
A lot of work beginning to all of you. Thank you so much for having a real conversation with us, because this is only the beginning.
We're not going to solve everything tonight, but as you mentioned, only the beginning. Good conversation. Panel, thank you very much for being here. Much more on Wish TV and wishtv.com. We'll see you back here tonight at 10 and 11. Thank you, Madam Walker Theater, for having us.